Hello, good afternoon, and welcome. My name is Susan Lynch. I am the Associate Director of Lifetime Learning at the University of Virginia's Office of Engagement. So pleased that you are joining us this afternoon for a program entitled A Changing Climate, Artificial Intelligence, and What We Can Predict. Before I tell you about our moderator, I want to bring a few things to your attention. We received many questions in advance of the program that have been shared with the speakers. If you have a question during the presentation, you may enter it in the webinar Q&A at the bottom of the screen. You'll find resources in the webinar chat box below. Please also note this program is being recorded and will be posted in Lifetime Learning's podcast library in the coming weeks. Now I will introduce our moderator, and then he will introduce the rest of the speakers. Chris Mooney is a professor of practice and a practitioner fellow at the Environmental Institute at the University of Virginia. A journalist for over 2 decades, from 2014 through mid-2024, Mooney worked at the Washington Post, where his team's data journalism project, 2 degrees Celsius Beyond the Limit, won the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory journalism in 2020. He writes about energy and the environment and has published 4 books about science, politics, and climate change. At UVA, Mooney teaches classes on environmental data, journalism, and environmental science communication. So we thank Chris for serving as moderator for today's event. And Chris, I invite you to start the presentation.
Thank you, Susan. It's wonderful to be here and to have so many in the audience. You heard who I am. I don't have a lot to say before getting us started, except that I'm certainly interested in how this event can potentially give us ways to think about the relationship between artificial intelligence and energy and the environment in a different way. There has been a lot of attention to issues of energy use and consumption, but we're also going to hear here, while we're not going to discard those, about the potential for environmental solutions or better readiness for climate impacts. So I just will give a brief sketch of how this is going to proceed. We have 3 panelists. Each of them will talk for about 5 minutes with the option of showing you some slides. Then I'm going to guide a discussion. I'll increasingly work in some of the audience's questions as well as my own. At this point, I'll just introduce the panelists in the order in which they'll speak, and then I will disappear when they appear. So first, we're going to hear from Madhav Marathi, professor of computer science in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at UVA, and also executive director and distinguished professor of biocomplexity at the Biocomplexity Institute at UVA. Next, we'll hear from Jess Rea, assistant professor of data science at the School of Data Science, again, here at UVA. And finally, we will hear from Matt Coleman, who is the chief risk officer at the DEMEX group. So at this time, I am going to turn my screen off and let Madhav start.
Thank you very much. Let me share my slides and then thank you very much, Chris. I want to start by thanking the organizers for kindly inviting me. I'm representing the Institute here and also my co-panelists. I look forward to having an interesting chat with them. So, this brief 5-minute presentation, I want to tell you a little bit about what the Institute does. And so the first question that you folks might have is, what is biocomplexity in the first place? So the term is a term that is not used that often. So let me try and give an informal definition. Biocomplexity, in our opinion, stands for the ideas that relate to the interactions of living and non-living agents and ecologies. And that includes humans as well as artificial agents, which are becoming more and more popular in these current days. The Institute is quite unique. It was established about 6.5 years back. And the focus of the Institute is to work on mission-driven projects that lead to fundamental advances in science and technology. Furthermore, we undertake problems that cannot be solved by a single faculty member or within narrow boundaries of a single discipline. In other words, we want to work as a team and try to undertake problems that require sophisticated tools and diverse intellectual resources. And we focus on making tangible societal impact through our work. What I'm going to describe in this short 4 minutes or so is a 30-year-old program in AI-enabled engineering and science of complex socio-technical systems to study climate change. As I said, we are focused on mission-driven science and the needs for effective, explainable, operational analytical tools. We've been funded by a large number of agencies. The Institute has about 80 individuals. Half of them are students, another half are technical staff members, including faculty members and research scientists. And the work that we have done spans from basic questions related to Clean Air Act, and the work that we started doing when the team was actually at Los Alamos National Lab, all the way to today's interesting questions that relate to energy usage and impact of energy production and climate. So how do we do this? Perhaps the best way to describe the work we do is in these three simple steps. Susan is going to put out a document in the chat that explains this in some more detail. But in the first step, we essentially synthesize what we people nowadays call as digital twins or digital similars. So the idea is if you want to study a particular region in the country, we want to build a fairly detailed representation of that place in a manner that is statistically very, very detailed, but doesn't violate the privacy of individuals. One of the key aspects of the work we do is representation of individuals, because we want to understand individual and collective adaptation to changes that happen in the environment, including the climate. The second step is to build AI-enabled models and simulations. These are called agent-based simulations in some of the quarters that allow us to study dynamics, how things change and how people might adapt to certain conditions as they evolve. And finally, we used AI-enabled tools and workflows to study problems related to resource allocation, decision support, and policy analysis. So let me quickly give you a couple of applications. I've chosen 4 classes of applications to illustrate the kinds of work we do. One class of applications relates to resilient and sustainable social habitats. We have been working with NASA to use data that they have provided us from remote sensing as well as environmental variables to study the impact of environmental variables such as heat, extreme heat events, air quality on human health. In particular, the goal is to understand how this affects various sections of the society. We've computed a term called social vulnerability index that extends the index that CDC has put out, but tries to capture details of these events on the population so that we can better respond during a crisis. The second class of applications have to do with flooding and coastal inundation. We've been working with our partners on the eastern seaboard of our state, but with others as well. Here we have developed methods to do forecasting, a very detailed forecasting of sea levels and coastal flooding due to events that happen, such as a tide or along with extreme rainfall. And this tool is being used now to understand key questions related to inundation at a very micro level. Very detailed analysis can be done with this kind of a tool. We have used a tool like this and its extensions to understand how we could evacuate populations from regions during, say, a hurricane event or local flooding that might lead to better preparedness, such as understanding how certain hospitals or urgent cares might be more vulnerable to local flooding that happens. We've also been working in energy systems. We have built out digital twins here of residential demands, the use of photovoltaics on rooftops, as well as adoption of electrical vehicles. And one of the interesting questions we have studied using this is the penetration of solar energy in residential regions, as well as impact of various climate scenarios that people have come up with on populations in Virginia. The results show that southwest parts of the state might be most vulnerable to climate change impact in this case. And finally, We've been studying questions related to a combination of climate change, agriculture, and AI. We want to understand here the impact of extreme weather events like floods or fires. We want to understand long-term droughts. And here we are trying to build out a very detailed representation of the agricultural system and combining it with questions related to how farming practices are done, markets are built out to share, say, water supply, and understand how people might react to these events. Let me quickly close by outlining 4 topics that we are currently interested in and have started to work on. One is to understand the sustainable growth of data centers. This is central to our state for sure. Virginia is the capital of data centers in the country. And we want to understand how we can sustain these data centers and how can we support them using a mix of energy sources. A second question that we think is very, very important is impact of climate change on global migration patterns and its impact on individual health. And finally, we want to understand the role of climate change on food insecurity and vector-borne diseases. So with that, let me stop in the interest of time and pass the floor to Jessica.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Jess. Thanks for having me, and thanks to all the attendees for being here today. So I'm a policymaker by training, and I've been working for over 15 years on urban data, smart cities, and technology policy. And today I'll briefly discuss some ethical concerns in this widespread use of AI that we see, including for climate prediction and sustainability efforts. And to do that, I will talk mostly about local governments and cities, because cities are very important to understand key AI ethical dilemmas and the direct impact that AI has on people, infrastructure, and the environment as well. Since AI systems became very important tools in urban governance and climate change mitigation, it's important for us to think about the kind of negative impacts, like potentialities, but also limitations and how to address them, because these systems promise solutions to complex issues while also contributing to some problems. For example, like the massive amount of energy to keep computers and data centers running, the water needed to cool them down, and the short life cycle of parts of a supercomputer, for example. So this is, even when we look at local problems, this is part of a global agenda. And I want to highlight this report from the UN Habitat recently released, and we'll share the link in the chat, that says that cities should be at the center of our climate actions. And because so many people are living there, and they are really where we see the more immediate impact of climate change. And all the city governments are looking for sustainable ways to use AI and tackle all these problems that we have in urban spaces for centuries of inequality. And some examples of these ethical concerns, there are many, but here I'll focus on a few. And examples are fairness, for example, in providing services to all with automation, accurate prediction of extreme weather and climate events, having reliable infrastructures like data centers, supercomputers, and how much they still rely on fossil fuels, for example, and we need a variety of other sources, and to rethink how we are keeping those that infrastructure working. And also robust mechanisms for transparency and accountability, because that might seem really far away from climate and AI, but actually it's very, very important. One example really close to us here in Virginia, as Madhav said, Virginia is the center of data centers, if you can say that. And right now, for example, we do have a community pushback. People are really worried, residents of these areas, these cities, on how all these proposed data centers, the darker red points in this map, are going to impact their daily lives and all the power they consume. Because if you think Virginia is still doesn't have the best power grid that we can imagine, so we really need to think about how we can balance these things and the trade-offs that we see in making that happen. We also shared the link to these resources in the chat for you. And I think here my main arguments would be 3, we can call them provocations, but things to think about. For example, to mitigate the climate crisis, we need open, reliable, consistent data. And now like we're seeing data sets disappearing from like open data portals, for example, farmers suing the government over the deletion of very important climate change data, for example, because this is also related on how we hold governments and companies accountable, like the money being invested in AI, for example, and like how to build technologies to impact assessment. So transparency is also connected to this like open data, having standards to have the data, and that data is important to train AI models as well. So I would say like this is very important to avoid bias, all sorts of harms and top-down decisions that doesn't consider the residents' needs. The second point would be to advance sustainability for all. We need to address fairness and the responsibility of AI as well, like asking questions like who bears the burdens of this massive AI adoption and climate change, because it is unequally distributed among territories and communities and neighborhoods and cities, for example. And what's the role of governments and companies in being responsible and accountable for these decisions instead of like just adopting AI for the sake of AI? And that connects to my third point, that's to truly pursue environmental justice when using AI, we should avoid these two words that we use in like in scholarship here, like techno-optimist. That's quite obvious, like being overly optimistic about the potentialities of technology. And another one that's techno-solutionism, using technology as a quick fix to problems that had been around sometimes like for decades or centuries. So very important to weigh the benefits and the harms, especially from a policy-making perspective. So integrate all like human rights, climate change mitigation into how we are assessing even the idea of risk and impact, like really broadly understood. And to finish this, I would like to leave you with like this document. We can think about like ethical dilemmas and the trade-offs to keep AI within planetary boundaries. We'll probably start to hear more and more this expression, like how can we make AI work with like the resources that we currently have and under like a climate crisis. And this agenda is very important because greenwashing meets ethics washing and smart washing. So we need a lot of efforts to rethink like the ethical concerns of AI. And in the AI Action Summit that happened last month that the US government refused to sign, we proposed like a joint statement that our lab signed it as well to demand like to keep AI within these planetary boundaries, and it touches upon several ethical concerns. We also share the link and I invite you to take a look because it's like from fossil fuels and responsible supply chains to equitable participation, civic engagement, and transparency issues as well. So thank you so much for your attention today. And I would like to pass this to my colleague, Matt.
All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I'm very excited to talk to you a little bit about how my company, Demex, which is a venture-backed advisory company within the insurance industry, how we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to better predict insured losses. First, just a little background on myself. My personal passion is putting a dollar number on day-to-day weather and long-term climate risk. I am a double who. I received my bachelor's degrees in chemistry and environmental sciences from UVA and also my MBA from the Darden School of Business. And I have a master's degree in meteorology from Penn State. For over 20 years, I've been working in the reinsurance industry, which I'll define in just a second. I started out at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, exploring the economic value of hurricane forecasts to the insurance industry. And following that, have been spending a lot of time and effort building climate insurance teams and businesses and structuring and creating financial protection for different sectors of the global economy that protects them effectively against the economic impacts of bad weather. And have also spent a lot of time managing climate investment portfolios, with primary stakeholders being capital providers who are looking for diversifying investments. I'm really excited to have established my career within the insurance value chain because the insurance industry has really proven over time that it's on the front lines of the economic impacts of climate change. This diagram here shows how this link, this chain is connected. All of us are individual policyholders who may hold auto insurance, home insurance, life insurance policies. We pay a premium to an insurance company in exchange for financial protection when bad things happen. Similarly, an insurance company also buys financial protection. If it has sold a lot of policies, has a lot of exposure that it has accumulated, an insurance company may often decide to purchase reinsurance by paying a reinsurance premium to another company in exchange for spreading out that liability of, largely protecting against when a large number of policyholders are impacted by a certain event at one time. Oftentimes, those events of concern to the insurance company are natural catastrophes, events like hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, and in my case, my current focus, day-to-day thunderstorms. The advisory services that Demex provides are located within the reinsurance market. And so ultimately, what we're doing are creating models that help insurance companies and reinsurance companies better understand the amount of loss they could expect to lose due to atmospheric perils. As I mentioned, the peril that we are focused on currently as a company are what I call day-to-day thunderstorms. In the meteorological community, they're called severe convective storms or SCS events. And it can be any combination of strong wind, hail, or tornadoes. It's not often known that these day-to-day thunderstorms, when you add them all up over the course of a year, they can accumulate to produce loss that exceeds the typical headline events like tropical cyclones, hurricanes, wildfires, and floods and earthquakes. Any single one of those other events can certainly dwarf a single thunderstorm event, but on average, in the aggregate, severe convective storms are the largest cause of insured loss. And that's true both domestically in the United States and also globally. So this problem with increased uncertainty, frequency, and impact of thunderstorms combined with fundamental shifts in this reinsurance marketplace has pushed a lot of thunderstorm risk from reinsurance companies back to the primary insurance companies who you and I tend to know and buy our own protection from. What has happened is, particularly in the 2010s, during that decade, insurance company losses due to thunderstorms accumulated so much and became so unpredictable, excuse me, that reinsurance companies stopped covering them. And this has effectively caused reinsurance companies to retreat up this tower of loss that I'm showing here, excuse me, and only cover the most rare, significant, severe events. And this has left insurance companies with the ability to continue to buy protection against those rare events, but they can no longer protect themselves as easily against the nicks and cuts, the small and medium-sized loss events caused by day-to-day thunderstorms. And so this has presented an opportunity for Demex to leverage frequency data sets to produce frequency models that are better able and more skillfully able to predict frequency losses caused by such thunderstorm events. Very quickly, what we do is leverage machine learning and large data sets of both historical weather events and also insurance claims from insurance companies in order to better predict the insured loss from these thunderstorms. We combine unique combinations of weather variables, things like upward motion, temperature differences, rainfall, wind speed, to understand which combinations of those weather events best relate and most closely relate to the historical loss experience of the insurance company. And the outputs of our model process are probability distribution of potential loss due to thunderstorms. And the way that we are modeling and packaging this risk in a clean way is enticing reinsurers to come back into the market and again sell this protection to insurance companies, which ultimately keeps the insurance company in business and helps their coverage that's available continue to be available to individual policyholders like us. And here's an example of some of that output that comes from our model, where we're looking at how much loss in a given year could a potential insurance company lose. And we use this information to also help structure and create the financial protection for the insurance company. And so with that, we're really excited about where we are as a growing venture-backed business, excited to continue to allow our models and the protection that we create to serve its purpose of helping smooth the earnings and increase predictability of insurance companies. As I said, keeping them in business, keeping protection available for underlying policyholders, and also giving the reinsurance companies who are also foundational to this overall value chain, the confidence to again offer this protection and stabilize the value chain overall. Thank you, and I look forward to opening this up to a broader panel discussion.
Thank you all for your presentations, and there's so many directions that this can go and so many things that can be asked. I do think that at the center of what many people in the world are thinking, and also at the center of this discussion, is some assessment of what the gain is versus the environmental impact. I think we're going to come at that in a variety of different ways. Even before we get to that, though, I feel like it would be good to for me to ask a bit of a baseline question. And I think that I don't think that that's for any panelists as opposed to for all of them, really. But I mean, it's sort of a where are we question. I mean, Matt is saying that this technology is already being used in the insurance industry. I've been doing my reading, and to some extent, it's being used in weather forecasting already. I don't know exactly how much it is actually impacting people's decisions or people's protections in the case of extreme events. And I just wonder if you could say, oh, for anyone on the panel, where are we? How much has this already permeated our world? Is it already here? And is it maybe inevitable?
Well, I can say from an industry perspective, for over 3 decades now, the insurance industry has been using what are called catastrophe models to really leverage data on the built environment, sparse, often sparse data sets on weather related events and other natural catastrophes, because by nature they're rare. So those data sets tend to be sparse. And so this idea of creating stochastic event sets, synthetic data sets, based upon limited information that we have available has been around for decades. I'd say today it's obviously a hot topic. You hear the buzzwords of AI and machine learning, and so in some respects, the industry is doing what it's always done. But to your points, Chris, there continue to be significant advancements in everything from weather-related forecasting, and tapping into other data sets that may not have been used as frequently for some of these other contexts. And that's part of what Demex is doing. We're going to daily and hourly weather data sets, not just for rare events, but really trying to go to source information that is a reflection of the problem at hand.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I just echo what Matt said, that some of the technologies have been available for a while. What's probably changed is the scale and quote unquote the real-timeness of the issue here. Matt said that very well. The temporal scale, the spatial scales have changed, but also would like to highlight that as decision makers, and decision makers includes everyone. Each of us is a decision maker. A person sitting in the Congress is a decision maker. We have this desire these days to get information right away and act on it based on that information. I think that's where there is a sweet spot for providing such information. The quality of the information, of course, is a challenging question that remains somewhat open, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask Jess. So of course, in the background of this, and you've raised it, is the problem of energy use. I'll just cite something I came across, which is a recent Goldman Sachs analysis, starting from around 55 gigawatts of current demand at data centers. They're projecting a 165% increase by 2030. Most of the growth, certainly not all of it, right? But a really big chunk of it would be due to AI. On the other hand, I don't know to what extent the kinds of tools we're talking about are the really big energy consumers. My understanding is that large language models take up considerably more than some of the technologies we're talking about. So I don't know. Could you help parse that for us a little bit, and speak to, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can echo what has been said before by my colleagues that AI has been around for a long time. Like automation of services is just like what we call AI.
Mm-hmm.
And we are calling AI like very, very different things, as we said, like large language models and some more like simple, we can say, forms of automation as well. And I would say like have been working with governments all these years, especially local governments. There's like a confusion, and AI seems pretty like enticing, and like everyone wants to be part of this right now, right? So sometimes we saw the like acquisition of technology that was kind of like too opaque or didn't have the like results that we were expecting. But at the same time, I would say there are ways to deal with this. Like one of the main proposals right now to think about this is like governments putting a cap on the amount of like energy that can be used. For example, this is one of the requests that came out of the AI Action Summit at the same time that energy was one of the main concerns in there, like fairness and responsibility, but also like how we can we keep this running without like destroying environments and the communities' access to electricity as well at the same time. And I would say like sometimes it does work and with like way more like successful experiences. And I can just mention like if you want everyone wants to read more like the operations center in Rio and how like they use it a pretty good like prediction model for floods, because Rio is like a city intensely affected by floods as well. So there are like really good perspectives and really good uses, but I think like right now we need to find the balance between like what is needed, where we are and where we are going.
Matt, Madav, would either of you like to speak to the energy challenge side of this and how you think about it?
Sure. So first of all, I agree that data centers have become a large consumer of energy. My personal, and it's a hypothesis, of course, is that this is not sustainable. We cannot continue to build. And I also think that next generation models, and researchers are working towards it, are going to be somewhat different. Right now, we have this view where a single centralized big model solves the problem. But I think a very good example is our brain. It's a relatively small packaged system which uses relatively very modest amount of energy but does amazing computation, and that's where things are at least people want to head towards. So I think we know what is potentially possible from nature's perspective. So I think there is a way to cut things down. Having said that, right now the consumption of energy by these data centers is just unsustainable. It's not easy to keep up with this level of energy. It's also important, Chris, to point out that this is what I think the term people use is dense energy, which means it needs a very constant level of energy at a particular level. You cannot have intermittent power and get away. And that has really started a new discussion on using nuclear power, because renewables are not going to be easily solving this particular problem. And I want to highlight that particular aspect as well.
Yeah, a couple of quick things that come to mind. First, I think of, having worked for multiple multi-billion-dollar investment firms, it's interesting to me how over time, they've gone from having servers and machines taking up whole floors, on site to merging into the cloud where they can use shared resources, which is a positive trend over time. But at the same time, the concerns that we're highlighting here, one of the places that I think about is, some kind of marginal energy use impact analysis. How much more energy are we using with AI versus the benefits we could potentially see from, reducing the impacts of climate change?
Let me just go in a little bit of a different direction as we start to think about using this in some kind of forecasting, some kind of capacity where you could maybe protect people in an event. I mean, and I don't know who would tackle this question, so I'll leave it open to all. But is 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 there a past disaster or analog we can think about where we can say someday we'll have a technology that'll allow us to avoid some of the worst that happened there, right? I mean, are we at that point?
Some examples of that I'm seeing, it's almost like a cherry picking exercise, which can have both, benefits and drawbacks, that I see in the insurance industry. There's innovation going on where, as computing power gets stronger and stronger, and we're able to look at finer and finer scales in both time and space, looking at two properties that might be in the same neighborhood or across the street from each other. And, is one of them in a materially, higher impact wildfire area, for example, than another? One example of one of my catastrophe modeling friends gave that, he used to live in the Hayward Hills in the Bay Area of California, and he lived on a golf course, highly irrigated. Even though he lives in the same county as other homes, given that he's living in a place that's relatively safer in terms of the characteristics around the house, you know, that type of information can be beneficial and giving us a better perception of risk, but we have to think about the consequences and the stability of something like pricing for insurance for those who may not live in those areas.
Um, I don't know if anyone else wants to take a swing at that. I'm for those not who are non-scientists but are thinking about how would my world change. It seems like one is I'm safer, and another is maybe my insurance changes. But I don't know if we should open that can of worms.
Chris, if I could just add,
Yeah.
and if I understood your question correctly,
Hmm.
your question had to do with a certain amount of predictability of these systems.
Yeah,
And
when can you apply this in real time, right? And potentially, yeah,
right,
potentially stave something off that otherwise would be damaging or
right.
real
So
disaster.
my general view on this is, and I think this is borne out by the mathematics that is backing this up, that these are complex systems, and predictability is inherently either extremely hard or oftentimes not possible at certain forms. It might be possible in aggregate. So you might get the average numbers right, but you're not going to have a hard time getting precise aspects of these distributions. Furthermore, uh, you might be able to say something about maybe the changes in temperature over the next 15 years. But when humans get involved, the problem gets worse, in my opinion, because fundamentally these are co-evolving systems. Our perception of what's changing makes us adapt to those things. And those adaptations can oftentimes lead to changes in the system itself. So even for climate change, what we might predict that the temperature might rise by three degrees in 20 years. But perhaps all of us on a good day change our behavior substantially and reduce the energy consumption, we might avoid that point. So notion of predictability needs to be thought through much more carefully, as opposed to simple predictions like, say, movement of the moon or planets. Those are predictions that are very, very deterministic and can be done. But these are complex systems where I think predictions of those sorts should not be viewed as possible, but we need to view them as control systems. How can we constantly adapt to the changes in a meaningful way?
Jess.
Yeah, if I can add something that hasn't been mentioned, like when we bring people into this, and I think like two very quick things. One, in terms of what do like people like residents want, and I think like this is often overlooking many of like this big like data center projects, for example, infrastructure or supercomputers, like high performing computing. And I think like one of the challenges that we see now in Virginia is a great example for this is how to listen to people and understand like what are the needs and what we do when they say, no, we don't want this kind of infrastructure here, like beyond like the prediction or the notion of benefits that you gain from that. So I think like listening to people is very, very important. And more like in a broader sense, I would say the role of AI in climate disasters, like extreme weather events, social media platforms and misinformation. We are like running into this like constantly that impacts like community engagement and the perception that people have about like technology. So when you think about this, it's like a topic that involves like so many other layers and it's really, really complex. And I just wanted to mention that.
Let me pull a question from the audience. This is one that was submitted in the process of signing up to attend this webinar. And I thought this was pretty interesting, and anyone can respond. Here's the question. If we train AI to predict extreme weather events and alert the public, how can we ensure that the AI is erring on the side of caution without causing excessive alarm? Will there still be humans to check the AI's predictions for accuracy?
Yeah, I'd say the short answer is yes. I've worked in a number of different settings with meteorology teams, for example, that sit on energy trading desks or are helping to build models to better predict things like insured loss. And one of the most important aspects of what we do is almost what I just think of as human quality control. And so, of course, as more information can feed into these systems, the systems get smarter. But one of the, for example, one of the most valuable aspects of a meteorologist whose specialty is forecasting is pattern recognition. What weather patterns have they seen historically, experienced? What forecasts have they missed in the past, and learned from? And so this human interpretation and this kind of quality control effort, it continues to be important for what we do to at Demex to physically validate, the predictions that are coming out of our model. We should be able to look historically with things like hindcasts and say, if we have the information and the predictions and relationships that we have built, and then throw historical weather through them, they should produce results that align with what we actually saw historically.
Anyone else want to speak to the role of the human in any ultimate prediction outputs? Yeah.
Right. So it's a very good question, first of all. Most of the complex systems, weather prediction, markets, I've worked a lot in pandemics. Humans play a role in this, and I do not think you can essentially put the AI in an autonomous mode. Having said that, there are, of course, smaller problems where you could put AI in a somewhat autonomous mode, doing checks somewhat infrequently. So it depends on the kinds of decisions one makes and the criticality of the decision. We have not reached a stage where critical decisions can be completely handed over. I view AI in this context more as a cognitive augmentation device, which means it's augmenting a human to make hopefully better decisions. Of course, very small decisions such as, what would the temperature be in the next 15 minutes in a small area. You might let the AI, quickly predict that, and the harm of it, if the numbers are somewhat off, is not potentially that high, right? But larger decisions certainly are something where humans have to play a role. And I do not foresee this to change anytime soon.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you. Yeah, go ahead.
If I can say anything, yes, the answer, yeah, I agree with like my colleagues, and this idea of the human in the loop is very important. And at the same time, some regulatory approaches to especially predictive AI say that like, yes, we should like label maybe by risk, as Madhav just said, like there's lower risk kind of application of AI, and the higher risk ones, absolutely, we should have like people involved. And also like people also build technology, and sometimes we kind of like forget that, like how this the models are training and how we are thinking about technology to like the application itself, the deployment of the application afterwards, and also like evaluation. So the cycle of like evaluating AI is like pretty like more comprehensive than just like the predictive tool itself.
Another question that we got that I think is very pertinent. It says, and I think we've answered the first part, but not the second. It says, what is the energy impact of AI data centers, and how quickly can they transition to 100% carbon-free energy?
Yeah, I actually attended a symposium just a couple of months back on this topic. It's going to be a while before that happens, if it happens in the first place. And the best source of energy we know that is essentially carbon-free is nuclear. Now it has got other challenges to deal with, but that's the energy source we know. But they take time to build. Even the modular reactors that people are talking about, the earliest, I think that we are likely to get one in Virginia, where plans are already in play now to try and install and deploy them, is between at least 5, more like 10 years or more. So we're far from that goal, which is a laudable goal to have and a goal that we should pursue. But it's going to be a while before that happens.
Anyone else want to address that one? Something that intrigues me, and I don't know how to evaluate it, but as I was reading about AI applications in the climate and energy space, is using AI to optimize energy systems and try to make the world more efficient, right? And use less. I gather this maybe could be applied in sort of building management and shifting loads around out of rooms where nobody's, using them or turning off the power there, I mean, could you speak to that a little bit? Is there an energy benefit possibly as well?
So yes, Chris, there are tools that are being made, very useful ones as well, where energy management can be done. In fact, our digital similars for residential demand, where we try to understand residential demand, is precisely set to understand these interventions at an individual level. But I'm somewhat concerned in that the rate of increase of energy usage we have will not be offset by these changes only, unless they are significant, right? So we are improving. We are significantly improving these tools. The systems that are being put out in homes are much more energy efficient, but our overall consumption of energy has not gone down, and I feel that trend is going to continue for some time.
Fair enough. Something we haven't brought up that much, maybe Jess, you could speak to this. I think it's something that you did raise a little bit, is transparency and reproducibility. I mean, if the tools are used in real life situations, what do we need to know about what they're doing? And is there anything that's not easily traceable? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. Actually, might not have like a very comprehensive answer, but I would say not right now. It's really like open source would be like a great answer to that, I would say. As we saw now with like DeepSeek from China, for example, like the competitiveness level in terms of like this kind of like more closed systems and open source. And that's valuable as well because every city, every state, every country, they have different needs. And if this is like adaptable, reproducible, it's better and can even involve like community in the development of solutions, let's say. But at the same time, I would say transparency in like how the technology is built, how it is like purchased by governments, again, like focusing on governments here, like how like the purchase goes, what are the consequences, did it involve any kind of human rights impact assessment or risk assessments, or like environmental impact assessment. So knowing everything that is like around the like just like acquiring and deploying the technology per se, thinking about governments again, it's very, very important. But I understand that like some companies might not like trade secrets, and they might not be able to like make everything transparent. So we can for sure at least try to hold governments accountable for the use of AI, thinking of like a public use that is widespread and will affect a lot of people as well, and like knowing the data sets where they came from so we can understand bias and missing links. So there are like several uses we can make of like transparency, and just like putting everything out there is not really enough. Like meaningful transparency means like making creating ways for people to understand what's like just like putting everything out there is not like really helpful, but also like creating ways that people can like monitor, hold accountable, and also like understand at least like how it's built or like how it's deployed and the consequence, like what can go wrong and to whom, for example. These are just like a few things that might like push us towards that direction.
Yeah, I would say transparency has been huge for us for a couple of reasons. One, we are a small and growing company, and the big insurance industry generally doesn't know who we are. And so to gain trust, transparency in how we're doing what we're doing has proven instrumental to continue to grow our business. And the second aspect is that the insurance industry itself, it is an industry that has a lot of inertia within it. Um, Adoption of technology has been gradual and it continues to innovate. But so much of the business that gets done in this industry is based on relationships. And so who you know is just as important as, how quickly you compute. And what we found is, deepening those relationships is much more efficient when we establish some boundary of intellectual property because we are a competing company. But generally, we err on the side of transparency so that the market participants who leverage our tools feel like they understand them, they can reproduce them, and have our ability to open access to us and our atmospheric science and data science and technology experts to understand how we're doing what we're doing.
Let me just follow up on that because I think that one place where this intersects with non-experts is clearly insurance. And I know that you're working in this particular intersection between insurance companies, reinsurance companies, but I mean, for the consumer, they've all seen rates change in, well, many locations recently. Um, and that's been a big story. I mean, can this help them get some clarity on why their rates are changing on an individual level?
I think it can. Um, the as events happen, those become very important data points for the industry as a whole. I think both AI, just the observation of events as they unfold, present an opportunity to um, correct and improve price signals for insurance. There's an overarching philosophical question of, is insurance a right or a privilege? And, it is a for-profit company that is balanced and checked, particularly at the individual policyholder level by state level regulators, which is good. But it's been very interesting, with us being in the reinsurance market and seeing how that lesser known part of the value chain, the reinsurers, they have a very strong effect on the pricing signals of all these events, because the risk ultimately finds its way up that loss chain to the reinsurers. And so when they make drastic decisions on what they will cover and what they won't, we can see that trickle through to the insurance companies and ultimately the policyholder.
I think that might be the point where we're out of time. I'm not sure. So okay, we have two more minutes. I guess I would say, would anyone like to pithily summarize everything and give any final statement? I'll leave it. I'll give you the chance. No? Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank all the panelists for their contributions. And I think it was a nice discussion that left a lot of additional threads to follow. So thanks for everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
And I think we'll bow out.
Great. So thank you so much to our esteemed panel. This was an interesting presentation about such timely and important topics. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience agrees. So thanks so much to each of our panelists for sharing your knowledge and expertise with UVA alumni, friends, and families. I want to take a moment to bring an upcoming Lifetime Learning event to your attention. Please consider joining us on Thursday, April 10th from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. for a program entitled Designing the Academical Village, Thomas Jefferson's Drawings for UVA. Lewis Nelson, a professor of architecture and associate provost for academic outreach at the University of Virginia, will examine Jefferson's drawings of the lawn and how they reveal an exciting process of trial and error that spanned over the many years he spent designing the grounds here at UVA. You can join this program in person at UVA's Newcomb Ballroom or online. So to register for this program and our other programs, visit our website at engagement.virginia.edu/learn. When you get to our website, you can check out future Lifetime Learning programs, the vodcast library, our Thoughts from the Lawn blogs, and our UVA Speaks podcast series to read, watch, and listen to our expert UVA faculty. So thank you again for joining us for this hour of learning, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening. Thank you so much.